History tells us that Europe's kings were all white, but hidden in chronicles, in cathedrals, and in statues across the continent are the faces of black rulers who wore the crown. For nearly 800 years, from Spain to Sicily, from France to Germany, black Moors ruled thrones across Europe, and their names were erased. This is their story, 10 forgotten black kings of Europe, whose reigns shaped the very foundations of the West. It begins in the year 711, when a general of African descent crossed the sea from North Africa with an army of Africans. His name was Tariq ibn Ziyad, and the rock where he landed still bears his name, Jabal Tariq, Gibraltar. Christian chroniclers wrote of him with awe and fear. Rodrigo Jiménez de Rada, a Castilian writer centuries later, recalled him as the black-skinned Saracen general who brought ruin upon the Visigoths. The earliest witness, the anonymous author of the Chronicle of 754, painted the moment with terror. The reins of their horses were as fire, their faces black as pitch. The noble Goths were broken in an hour. O luckless Spain! Tariq's arrival was more than a conquest. It was the opening of a new age. His victory shattered the old Visigothic order, and from the ashes rose a new kingdom, Moorish Spain, where Africans would rule on European soil. From that beginning came dynasties. Abd al-Rahman I, a prince of the fallen Umayyad house, fled through Africa after the massacre of his family in Damascus. In 756, he established himself in Cordoba and built a new emirate. The Arab historian al-Makari described him. He was of dark complexion, tall, and of noble African bearing. Abd al-Rahman was more than a survivor. He was a builder. Under him, Cordoba grew into a capital of power and sophistication. Gardens bloomed, libraries multiplied, and the Mosque of Cordoba began to rise, its arches a statement of a new order. He proved that Moorish kings were not simply invaders passing through. They were rulers of Europe itself. Generations later, Abd al-Rahman III declared himself Caliph of Cordoba in 929, making his kingdom the equal of Baghdad and Cairo. His power was vast, his learning profound, but his appearance was remembered most vividly by those who saw him. The historian Janina Safran notes, drawing from Arabic sources, that his complexion was dark, his hair was thick and curly. His African ancestry was clear. Yet in European paintings centuries later, he was often whitened, his true features denied. Under Abd al-Rahman III, Cordoba became the most advanced city in Europe. Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a Jewish envoy, marveled that it contained more than 70 libraries and learning from Africa, Arabia, and beyond. The city's streets were lit by lamps, while London and Paris remained dark and muddy. A black caliph presided over Europe's jewel. The line of kings continued with the formidable Al-Mansur ibn Abi Amir, remembered in Christian lands as Al-Manzur. Rising from humble beginnings, he became the most powerful man in Cordoba, leading over 50 campaigns against the Christian north. Ibn Idari, the Moorish chronicler, wrote simply, "He never lost a battle." In 997, his armies carried the bells of Santiago de Compostela's cathedral on the backs of Christian captives to Cordoba. His name was spoken in France with dread, the Black General Almanzor, whose raids shook Christendom. His power extended beyond Spain, proving that Moorish kingship was a force across borders. From the Sahara itself came another king, Yusuf ibn Tashfin of the Almoravid dynasty. Ibn Khaldun, the great historian, described him. Dark of skin, thin and ascetic in his dress, but mighty in his command. When Christian armies threatened to overwhelm Moorish Spain, it was Yusuf who crossed into Europe. At the Battle of Sagrajas in 1086, he crushed the Christian forces and restored Moorish control. He ruled both Morocco and much of Spain, a black king whose empire spanned 2 continents. Yusuf built Marrakesh into a capital, but his shadow fell over Europe, where his victories preserved the Moorish thrones for generations. The Moors did not confine themselves to Iberia. In 827, they invaded Sicily, and by the 10th century, rulers like Hassan al-Kalbi transformed Palermo into one of Europe's greatest cities. The geographer Ibn Hawqal wrote, "Palermo is larger than any city in Italy, filled with gardens and palaces." Under the Kalbid dynasty, Sicily became a jewel of learning and prosperity. Its irrigation, architecture, and culture bore the mark of Africa. The golden mosaics that still glitter in Palermo's cathedrals are the legacy of Moorish kings who once ruled the island. Another African dynasty that cast its shadow over Europe was that of Al-Mu'izz ibn Badis of the Zirids. Though his seat was in North Africa, his reach extended across the Mediterranean into Italy. His armies and governors held Sicily, and his scholars and artisans shaped its culture. The historian al-Bakri wrote of his reign, "The people of Sicily bowed to his governors, and his African armies held the land." Under Al-Mu'izz, African knowledge, law, and art crossed into Europe, fusing with local traditions and leaving monuments that still stand. Beyond Iberia and Italy, black kingship appeared in surprising places. In Germany, in the Cathedral of Magdeburg, stands the statue of Saint Maurice, a black African knight venerated as a saint and royal figure. Carved in the 13th century, his features are unmistakably African. Art historian Gude Sukala Redlefsen observed, "Maurice's face is that of an unmistakably African man, with tightly curled hair and full lips, carved in stone at the very heart of Germany." Here was a black king, immortalized not in chronicles, but in stone, honored as a symbol of chivalry and faith at the center of Europe. In Cologne too, the memory of black kings was preserved. The Shrine of the Three Kings in the Great Cathedral includes depictions of the Magi, and from the 14th century onward, one of them is clearly shown as black, crowned and regal. Jean de Visse, the art historian, wrote, "The black magus was not a servant, but a king. His crown, a recognition that Africa produced rulers equal to any in Europe." These were not minor decorations. They were central to Christian Europe's greatest shrines. The image of black kingship was carved into Europe's sacred spaces. The last of the Moorish kings was Boabdil, Muhammad XII of Granada. In 1492, he surrendered the city to Ferdinand and Isabella, ending nearly 800 years of Moorish rule in Europe. Spanish historian Luis del Marmol Carvajal described him. His features were Moorish, his skin dark, and his eyes deep with sorrow when he left Granada. His mother's words are said to have cut him deeply. "Weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." With Boabdil's exile, the line of Moorish kings in Europe ended. Yet even in defeat, he remained a king of African heritage, the last in a line that had ruled from Gibraltar to Sicily, from Cologne to Cordoba. For 8 centuries, Europe's thrones were not only white. Black kings ruled its cities, built its palaces, and commanded its armies. Tariq ibn Ziyad opened the way. Abd al-Rahman built Cordoba. Abd al-Rahman III lit its lamps. Al-Manzur carried terror into Christian lands. Yusuf ibn Tashfin spanned continents. Hassan al-Kalbi turned Palermo into a jewel. Al-Mu'izz ibn Badis tied Africa to Sicily. Saint Maurice was immortalized in stone. The Black Magus crowned in Cologne. And Boabdil wept as the last Moorish king departed Granada. Their faces were dark, their hair curly, their bearing African, and the chronicles testify even when paintings do not. Europe has tried to erase them. Painters whitened their portraits. Historians silenced their names. But stone does not lie. The statue of Saint Maurice still stands in Magdeburg. The Black Magus still gazes from Cologne's cathedral glass. The arches of Cordoba and the mosaics of Palermo still gleam with Moorish artistry. These were not shadows, nor myths, nor outsiders. They were kings of Europe, black kings, forgotten by design, but not lost. Their thrones were broken, but their memory endures, And today, we speak their names again. The sea was crossed, the banners raised, Europe trembled, the world amazed. From Africa's shore, the Moors set sail, and history bent beneath their trail. Tariq came with a firestorm's hand, his warriors dark as the desert's sand. The chronicles cried in mournful strain. The reins of their horses were as fire, their faces black as pitch. The noble Goths were broken in an hour. O luckless Spain! Abd al-Rahman built Cordoba's might, where lamps of learning outshone the night. In halls of marble and gardens wide, the wisdom of Africa would not hide. Almanzor struck with iron will, and all of Christendom fears him still. Yusuf came with Saharan flame, and Europe remembered the Black King's name. Palermo blossomed, mosaics shone, Hassan al-Kalbi claimed that throne. Al-Mu'izz stretched his hand across, and Sicily bowed beneath his cross. In Magdeburg, carved deep in stone, St. Maurice stands, his black face known. In Cologne's glass, the Magus reigns, a crown on his brow that still remains. Boabdil wept when thrones were gone, but Moorish glory forever shone. 8 centuries their banners flew, and Europe's heart their blackness knew. Though history tried to lock the door, their truth breaks chains forevermore. So speak their names, let memory soar. These black kings ruled, forgotten no more. In the shadowy reaches of the Caucasus Mountains, where the winds of time whisper secrets and the stones themselves remember, lies a land called Abkhazia. This misty coastal stretch along the Black Sea has long puzzled scholars and silenced truth-seekers. For buried beneath its pine-scented hills and ancient towers is a tale few dare to tell. A tale of black nobility, of a dark-skinned people who once ruled the heights of Russia before history was rewritten, distorted, and drowned in whiteness. The Abkhazians, known today as a mysterious Caucasian ethnic group, were once the ancient Black Russians. They were not visitors. They were not slaves. They were kings, priests, builders, warriors, and settlers whose legacy reaches back thousands of years into a time when the African presence in Eurasia was as natural as the sun rising in the east. Ancient sources once spoke freely of these early black populations in regions that now evoke Slavic imagery: Georgia, Armenia, Chechnya, and even parts of southern Russia. But with the rise of European nationalism, colonial racial science, and the whitening of world history, this truth was buried under waves of propaganda. But now, with artificial intelligence capable of cross-referencing ancient maps, linguistics, DNA studies, and neglected historical records, the memory is returning. And AI is now beginning to confirm what many Afrocentric scholars have long maintained. The original peoples of many Eurasian territories, including Russia, were African in origin. The Abkhazians, in particular, are one of the most intriguing remnants of this Black Eurasian legacy. Their name is ancient, linked in some linguistic circles to the Egyptian Pakaz, meaning House of the Nobles, or Noble Ones. Their mythology echoes the cosmologies of Nubia and Kemet, with ancestral spirits, divine kingship, and ritual practices that seem far more aligned with African spirituality than European orthodoxy. Even today, their songs and dances bear an uncanny resemblance to West African traditions. Their polyphonic chanting mirrors that of the Mbuti of the Congo. Their circular war dances resemble those of the Dogon. And their facial features, when examined in pre-modern paintings and early photographs, betray a distinctly African physiognomy. Broad noses, full lips, tightly coiled hair. One might ask, how could Africans have ended up ruling in the Caucasus? The answer lies not in modern colonial migration, but in pre-Ice Age human movement, and in the forgotten kingdoms of prehistory. You see, the notion that all ancient Black history belongs south of the Sahara is a fiction, a colonial invention. The truth is that Black humanity once covered the earth. Before the coming of lighter-skinned Eurasian tribes, the people who walked the steppes, the mountains, and the riverbanks of Europe and Asia were dark. Their bones have been dug up in places where no one expected them. their DNA is still being found in the strangest of places. In 2017, scientists uncovered a 10,000-year-old skeleton in Cheddar Gorge, England. The man, affectionately dubbed Cheddar Man, was found to have dark skin and blue eyes, clearly black in phenotype. Genetic analysis confirmed what the bones had already said. Early Britons were not white. They were black. If black people lived in ancient England, is it so difficult to believe they also thrived in Russia? One must remember the global movement of the Natufians, the earliest known builders of villages and religious shrines, who emerged from North Africa and migrated into the Levant and beyond. They brought agriculture, mathematics, architecture, and African spirituality into Asia and Europe. From there, early African migrants moved into Anatolia, the Caucasus, and southern Russia. The Abkhazians may have been among their descendants, establishing principalities long before the emergence of the Rus, the Slavs, or the Tsars. Some historians even speculate that the biblical Magog, the warlike northern kingdom, may have had black origins linked to these highland peoples. Medieval Arab and Persian chroniclers often describe the northern territories as inhabited by Sudan or Zanj, terms used for black people. The famous traveller Ibn Battuta described the people of the northern Caucasus as dark-skinned and strong. Even in Slavic folklore, there are echoes of this forgotten presence. The hero Chernobog, literally Black God, was demonized in later Christian eras, but he likely derives from earlier African deities, once honored as bringers of balance and knowledge. One of the most direct links between black Africans and Abkhazia can be found in the kingdom of Colchis. Yes, the very land where Jason and the Argonauts sailed to retrieve the Golden Fleece. Colchis, according to Greek historians like Herodotus and Strabo, was home to a dark-skinned people with woolly hair and African features. Herodotus specifically wrote that the Colchians were black-skinned and had kinky hair, and that they practiced circumcision like the Egyptians. He even claimed that they were descended from a contingent of Egyptian soldiers left behind by Pharaoh Sesostris. Colchis was located in what is now western Georgia, directly adjacent to Abkhazia. The cultures were linked, their artifacts shared motifs, and their people likely intermarried. In other words, the Black Colchians and the Abkhazians were cousins, branches of the same African-rooted tree. Yet while Colchis made it into the European imagination through Greek mythology, the Abkhazians were slowly erased. As the Russian Empire expanded, it launched waves of extermination, assimilation, and cultural whitening campaigns that devastated the native highland peoples. Many black Abkhazians were killed, expelled, or forcibly mixed. The Russian conquest of the Caucasus in the 19th century, known as the Caucasian War, was not just about land, it was about memory. It was about erasing the last visible links to a time when Africa was not a continent apart, but the mother of the world. Yet memory resists erasure. In local legends passed down by Abkhazian elders, there are tales of dark ancestors who came from the south and built the first cities. Some refer to them as the ones with sun in their skin. In mountain villages, stone structures older than any known Slavic settlement are still worshipped and maintained. No one knows exactly who built them. But the style is unmistakably African, circular, aligned with the stars, and inscribed with symbols that match Nubian script and Meroitic designs. Even the language of the Abkhazians bears traces of African roots. The Abkhaz tongue belongs to the Northwest Caucasian family, known for its extreme consonantal density and unusual phonemes. Interestingly, similar sound patterns are found in southern Nigerian languages, like Efik and Ibibio, languages known for their consonantal clusters and nasal tones. While this could be coincidence, the cross-referencing of ancient migrations makes it plausible that remnants of African syntax, phonology, and cosmology survived in the Caucasus long after the skin of the people had been bleached by by intermarriage and imperial violence. One of the most astonishing pieces of evidence comes from photography. In the archives of pre-Soviet Russia, tucked away in forgotten corners of museums, are photographs of noble Abkhaz families from the late 1800s and early 1900s. In some of these, you can clearly see black faces, proud, regal, and adorned in aristocratic attire. These are not enslaved Africans or foreign travelers. They are native sons of the land, descendants of a lineage that stretches back to a time before Europe called itself white. Their eyes burn with the memory of forgotten empires, and their silence asks us, "Who are you to forget us?" In Soviet times, the Abkhazians were further suppressed, their autonomy crushed, their heroes rewritten. The whitening process intensified, and yet, despite decades of erasure, their oral traditions persisted. Some elders still speak of a time when their ancestors rode horses like Nubian cavalry, worshipped the gods of the sun, and sang songs in a tongue older than Russia itself. They tell of temples made from basalt, of ancestors who came from the direction of the Nile, and of skin as dark as night. Across the Black Sea in Turkey, small African-descended communities still exist in Izmir and Antalya, remnants of an African population that once spanned the entire coastline. In fact, some Turkish scholars admit that early Turks encountered black populations in Anatolia and the Caucasus when they first migrated from Central Asia. In Georgian historical chronicles, there are references to dark tribes in the mountains who resisted both Persian and Russian invasions for centuries. These dark tribes are never depicted in modern Georgian textbooks, but they existed, they resisted, and they left their seed in the soil. When we speak of the African diaspora, we often think of the Atlantic slave trade, of Haiti, Brazil, or Mississippi. But the diaspora began long before slavery, before ships, before chains. The original diaspora was the movement of humanity itself from Africa into every corner of the earth. And in places like Abkhazia, the African presence was not one of exile or captivity, but of kingship. The Abkhazians were the children of black nobility. Their blood remembers pyramids, not plantations. It is time we expand our maps. It is time we reclaim the frozen chapters of our story, thaw them with fire, and speak them aloud. The Abkhazians, those mysterious, almost forgotten people of the Black Sea coast, are not a footnote. They are a reminder, a revelation, a resurrection of truth buried under snow and shame. And now that AI is reviving their memory, it is our duty to honor them, to teach their story, and to restore the dignity of a people who once ruled where few imagined they ever stood. Russia, that land of onion domes and frosted history, is not just white. Its soil carries the footprints of black giants. And Abkhazia is their monument, unseen, unsung, but eternal. We were there before the snows fell down, before white crowns ruled the northern crown. In mountain mist and forest breath, we carved our names on stone and death. Black were the kings in coats of light, riding through stars in Caucasian night. The drums they beat are silent now, but history hears, and truth knows how. We bore the fleece that Greece desired, lit temple fires the Slavs admired. Our faces etched in granite walls, erased by time, but memory calls. We are the ghosts in Russian veins, the sunlight lost in empire reigns. But winds remember, rivers know, and AI whispers, let it show. We were there. We still are. The striking images of Africans in ancient European art, spanning from Greek vases to the noble houses of Moorish Spain, tell a story that has been largely overshadowed by revisionist histories. These depictions, often dismissed or misinterpreted, reveal a legacy of African presence in Europe that challenges mainstream narratives. From the celebrated warriors and scholars of antiquity to the Moorish rulers who shaped medieval Spain and beyond, the imprint of black Africans on European civilization is undeniable. Ancient Greek art frequently depicted African figures, often with remarkable realism and respect. The Greeks, who were in regular contact with Egypt and other African civilizations, acknowledged their influence in art, philosophy, and science. The historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described the Ethiopians, a term often applied broadly to dark-skinned Africans, as the most handsome of men, and noted their advanced customs and martial prowess. Greek vases and sculptures depict African individuals as warriors, traders, and diplomats, indicating their integrated presence in the Mediterranean world. The famous Ethiopian archer, depicted in Greek pottery, is just one of many examples highlighting African military and cultural roles in antiquity. As we move forward in time, the African presence in Europe becomes even more pronounced with the rise of the Moors. The term Moor itself is derived from the Latin morus, meaning dark or black, and historically referred to the African populations that conquered and ruled vast territories in Spain, Portugal, and Europe. By the 8th century, the Moors had established a powerful civilization in Al-Andalus, one that would become the intellectual and cultural beacon of Europe. British historian Basil Davidson, a preeminent scholar of African history, declared that, throughout the continent of Europe, there were no lands in the 8th century AD that were more admired by its neighbours, or more comfortable to live in, than a rich African civilization which took shape in Spain. The Moors introduced advancements in multiple fields that laid the groundwork for Europe's Renaissance. They established vast libraries, such as the one in Cordoba, that housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts at a time when much of Europe lacked even a single public library. The introduction of Arabic numerals replaced the cumbersome Roman numeral system, facilitating developments in mathematics and commerce. Innovations such as the astrolabe, used for celestial navigation, and the compass, brought from China by the Moors, revolutionized European exploration and maritime dominance. The medical texts of figures like Al-Zahrawi, Abul-Qasis, influenced European surgery for centuries, and Moorish philosophers such as Ibn Rushd, Averroes, played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting classical knowledge back to Europe. The economic and agricultural transformations introduced by the Moors were equally profound. They brought new crops such as oranges, lemons, peaches, apricots, figs, sugarcane, dates, ginger, and pomegranates, as well as saffron, cotton, silk, and rice, many of which remain staple products of Spain and southern Europe to this day. Advanced irrigation systems, such as canats and acequias, revolutionized European agriculture, making regions like Andalusia fertile and prosperous. Portugal also felt the imprint of the Moors, who ruled over what is now its capital, Lisbon, then called Lisbona, for centuries. The very name of the Iberian Peninsula itself bears witness to its Moorish past, and the architectural grandeur left behind in cities like Seville, Cordoba, and Granada remain some of the most stunning remnants of African rule in Europe. The intricate tilework, geometric patterns, and horseshoe arches that define Spanish architecture owe much to Moorish influence. Despite their monumental contributions, the Moors faced increasing resistance as European kingdoms consolidated power. The gradual Christian reconquest, known as the Reconquista, eroded Moorish control over centuries. The final blow came in 1492, when the last Moorish stronghold, Granada, fell to the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. The act of capitulation marked the end of nearly 800 years of African rule in Spain. But the cultural and intellectual influence of the Moors continued to reverberate across Europe. The legacy of the Moors did not disappear with their departure. Across Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, England, and beyond, traditional festivals still commemorate their presence. These celebrations often feature participants donning Moorish costumes, and, controversially, some European countries have historically employed blackface in their reenactments. While some have pushed back against these portrayals, the persistence of these traditions is a testament to the lasting imprint of African nobility in Europe. One of the most prominent of these festivals occurs on the evening of January 5th, when Spain celebrates the arrival of the three wise men, Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. In this Dia de los Reyes Magos, the figure of Balthazar, often depicted as a black African king, is central to the parade. While modern discourse has sparked controversy over the use of blackface in these festivities, it remains an annual reminder of the deep-rooted presence of Africans in European history. Beyond these festivals, another enduring testament to the African presence in Europe is the vast number of aristocratic family crests bearing distinctly African imagery. These heraldic symbols, found in the lineage of noble European houses, depict African figures as ancestors of distinguished families. The visual evidence on these crests suggests a long history of intermingling between African and European elites, a reality often omitted from popular historical discourse, according to Goodwin, in his 1957 work titled Africa in Europe. The scholarly tradition of the Moors was not isolated. It was deeply rooted in the knowledge systems of West Africa. The great empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai had long established centers of learning, such as Timbuktu, Gao, and Djenné, where scholars gathered to study and debate science, philosophy, and mathematics. These centers were critical in maintaining and advancing knowledge that would later influence European intellectual traditions. In conclusion, the African imprint on Europe is undeniable, despite centuries of historical revisionism and erasure. From the artistic depictions in Greek and medieval European art to the Moorish reign over Spain, Africa's contributions to European civilization were vast and transformative. The echoes of this history remain visible today in architecture, science, heraldry, and cultural traditions that persist across the continent. It is imperative that this legacy is acknowledged and studied further to provide a more comprehensive and accurate understanding of Europe's true historical tapestry. The Viking Age is often portrayed as a time of exploration, conquest, and expansion by Scandinavian warriors. However, one of the lesser-known but critical aspects of Viking society was their involvement in the global economy, including the human slave trade. While Viking raids and pillaging are frequently highlighted, their role as traders, particularly in the buying and selling of human beings, remains a vital part of their history. In this global network, the Moors, who were predominantly black Africans ruling vast territories in the Iberian Peninsula and North Africa, played an essential role. The Moors bought European slaves from the Vikings, underscoring the reality that slavery is not a phenomenon unique to any single race or culture. Rather, it was a transcontinental system involving various peoples, including Africans who bought and sold slaves of different ethnic backgrounds, including white Europeans. The Vikings were more than just marauding warriors. They were also traders, deeply embedded in the economic systems of the time. Slavery was an integral part of their society, as it was for most civilizations, and Viking raids often resulted in the capture of slaves, known in Old Norse as thralls. These captives were either used for labor within Viking households and farms, or traded for goods with other societies, including the black African Moors. The primary source of slaves for the Vikings was the various peoples they encountered during their raids across Europe. They targeted the British Isles, the Slavic territories in Eastern Europe, and parts of modern-day France. Vikings would descend upon villages, monasteries, and towns, capturing people to be sold as slaves. These captives were diverse in origin, including Anglo-Saxons, Celts, and Slavs, hence the linguistic origin of the word slave from the Slavic people. The enslaved captives were taken back to Scandinavian markets or transported along Viking trade routes. From there, they were sold in major trading hubs or exchanged with other civilizations, including the Moors in Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. The Viking slave trade was not merely a European affair. It was a transcontinental system involving African buyers, underscoring the shared global participation in slavery. Slavery was a fundamental part of Viking society. Thralls worked as labourers on farms, artisans, and domestic servants, fulfilling essential economic roles. However, Vikings were not content to keep all of their captives for themselves. The trade of human beings became an integral part of their economy, enriching the Norse elite and facilitating further exploration and expansion. The Vikings' vast network of trade routes stretched from the North Atlantic to the Mediterranean and the Middle East, providing them with access to a wide range of markets where they could exchange white slaves for goods such as silver, gold, textiles, spices, and even weaponry. The exchange of slaves for wealth further empowered the Vikings, making their long voyages possible and their dominance over certain regions of Europe more secure. During the Viking Age, much of the Iberian Peninsula was under the control of the Moors, who were rulers of African origin, predominantly black Africans from West Africa and North Africa. These rulers, who established the Umayyad Caliphate of Al-Andalus, were known for their advanced civilization, which was marked by significant achievements in science, mathematics, philosophy, and architecture. The Black Moors created a cosmopolitan society in Iberia that became one of the intellectual and cultural centres of the medieval world. Slavery, while often seen through the lens of European involvement, was a widespread institution across the African and Islamic worlds long before and during the Viking Age. African and Arab traders had been capturing and selling slaves for centuries, with slaves coming from various ethnic backgrounds, including both Africans and Europeans. In Moorish society, slaves were acquired through warfare or trade and played a variety of roles, from domestic workers and artisans to soldiers and labourers. The Black African Moors were part of a global network of trade that connected Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. They were eager buyers of European slaves who were valued not only for their labour, but also for their exoticism. This challenges the conventional narrative that slavery was a one-directional system where only Africans were enslaved. In reality, Black African Moors, like other civilizations, bought and sold slaves of different races, including white Europeans. This participation underscores the global nature of slavery and dispels the myth that it was a racialized institution from its inception. One striking example comes from the Spanish historian Father Mariana, who noted, regarding the invasion of Europe by African Moors, that the reins of their horses were as fire, their faces black as pitch. The very look of them was so terrifying that the people fled from them as from a devouring pestilence. Oh, luckless Spain! This vivid description emphasizes the striking contrast between the dark-skinned Moors and the local populations of Spain, reinforcing the large presence of Black Africans among the Moorish rulers. The connection between the Vikings and the Black African Moors in the slave trade was one of economic pragmatism. The Vikings supplied slaves from Europe to the Moors in exchange for goods, making both parties beneficiaries of this human trafficking system. The Moors, with their expansive trade networks in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and beyond, represented a lucrative market for the Vikings. The Viking raids on the Iberian Peninsula brought them directly into contact with the Black Moors. In 844 AD, Viking ships sailed up the Guadalquivir River and attacked the city of Seville, then under Moorish control. Although initially successful, the Viking forces were eventually repelled by the Moors. Despite this defeat, the Vikings continued to raid the coasts of Iberia and France, capturing white slaves, whom they sold to the Moors and other civilizations. The raids opened up channels for both conflict and trade, between the Vikings and the Moors. Over time, rather than engaging solely in warfare, the Vikings and Moors developed more cooperative relations. The Vikings provided a steady supply of white European slaves, while the Moors offered valuable goods, including silver, gold, textiles, and spices. This trade relationship highlights the pragmatism of both civilizations, where economic benefit often outweighed ideological or religious differences. The Viking slaves sold to the Moors found themselves in bustling slave markets in cities like Cordoba, Seville, and Valencia, major centers of commerce in Al-Andalus. These European slaves were in high demand among the black African Moors, partly because of their rarity and distinct physical characteristics. Female slaves, in particular, were often used in domestic service or within harems, while male slaves were employed as soldiers, bodyguards, or labourers. The Viking slave trade, therefore, became an essential part of a broader Mediterranean and North African system of exchange, where slaves of different races were traded across continents. The Moors' participation in this trade, alongside other African societies, challenges modern assumptions that the African continent was only ever a victim of slavery. Black African Moors were active agents in the global trade of human beings, buying and selling white European slaves, among others. The Viking Moorish slave trade had profound implications for both civilizations. For the Vikings, the economic benefits were immense. The wealth acquired through the sale of slaves allowed them to finance their long voyages and further exploration. It also helped sustain their dominance over certain parts of Europe, as the influx of foreign goods and wealth strengthened their economies. For the black African Moors, European slaves provided labour and military power. These slaves played critical roles in the economy of Al-Andalus, contributing to agriculture, construction, and domestic service. Some even found themselves in positions of influence within the military or households, indicating the complex nature of slavery in medieval Moorish society. The exchange of slaves between Vikings and Moors also facilitated a broader cultural interaction between Northern Europe and the Islamic and African worlds. Captured slaves brought with them their languages, beliefs, and customs, and while their primary role was as labourers, they also contributed to a subtle blending of cultures. In cities like Cordoba, which was a major intellectual centre, the presence of European slaves likely influenced the exchange of ideas and knowledge between different cultures. This cultural exchange was not limited to European slaves assimilating into Moorish society. It also worked in the opposite direction. Vikings, exposed to the sophisticated civilization of the black African Moors, would have carried new ideas, technologies, and knowledge back to Scandinavia, contributing to the intellectual and cultural development of the Norse world. By the end of the 11th century, the Viking slave trade began to decline, partly due to the Christianization of Scandinavia. As Viking rulers and their people converted to Christianity, the enslavement of fellow Christians became increasingly unacceptable. This moral and ideological shift, combined with the growing political power of European kingdoms, reduced the Vikings' ability to capture and sell slaves. Additionally, the political and military might of Viking territories weakened over time, causing a gradual end to their dominance in Europe. Without the ability to maintain their slave trade routes and acquire new captives, the transcontinental exchange between the Vikings and black African Moors slowly diminished. In conclusion, the history of the Viking slave trade and the involvement of the black African Moors highlight the complexities of human trafficking in the medieval world. Slavery was not merely a one-dimensional institution, but rather a dynamic and multifaceted system involving various peoples across continents. The Vikings' role in capturing and selling slaves to the Moors illustrates the interconnectedness of societies and the shared nature of human suffering. As we examine the past, it is essential to recognize the agency of those involved in the slave trade, both victims and perpetrators. The narrative surrounding slavery must acknowledge the participation of various groups, including the Moors, who were active in the trade of human beings. The interplay between Vikings and Moors serves as a reminder that slavery is not a singular historical experience, but a shared legacy that transcends racial and cultural boundaries. And yet, in modern discussions about reparations and justice, it's clear that the history of slavery is far more intricate than the simplified narratives we often hear. After all, turns out the reparations paperwork might be a bit more complicated than we earlier thought. But this complexity doesn't diminish the importance of addressing historical wrongs. It highlights the need for a deeper understanding of the interwoven experiences of oppression and agency across history. History often lies in the hands of those who write it, and too frequently, the stories of Africa's influence on European civilizations have been erased, misrepresented, or buried under layers of Eurocentricity. One such overlooked story is that of the Dubhgaill, the black strangers who wielded power in Denmark and beyond. Far from being a mere footnote, these Black Danes shaped an era of Scandinavian history, their influence leaving traces in folklore, place names, and genetic memory. The story of the Dubhgaill challenges everything we think we know about medieval Europe, illuminating how African peoples and their descendants left an indelible mark on the north. The name Dubhgaill comes from Gaelic, translating directly to black foreigners or black strangers. These invaders were distinct not only in their role as outsiders, but in their darker complexion, a trait that set them apart from the lighter-skinned Finngaill, or white strangers of Norwegian origin. As noted by Michael Conran in The National Music of Ireland, 1846, philologists inform us that the compound term Dubh Loch Lanach, or black man strong at sea, signifies the Danes. This description aligns with numerous medieval accounts, where the Dubhgaill were remembered not merely as conquerors, but as an African-identified people who played a formative role in shaping the regions they dominated. The racial distinction between the Dubhgaill and the Finngaill is supported by historical sources that directly describe the Danes as black, in contrast to their Norwegian counterparts. In the London Quarterly Review, 1870, it is recorded, "They were of two races, the white and black strangers, Finngaill and Dubhgaill." Similarly, Saint Berchant, a monk and historian, described the Norwegians as Gentiles of pure colour, while the Danes were consistently referred to as Dub or black. These labels were not arbitrary. They carried weight in defining the power struggles between these groups, as seen in the year 850, when the Dubhgaill captured Dublin, wresting control from the Finngaill. In the annals of Gaelic history, this moment was pivotal, marking the Dubhgaill's emergence as dominant forces in the Viking world. The Annals of Ulster, a chronicle of Irish history, recorded, "In AD 850, the Dubhgaill overcame the Fionnghail and seized Dublin, securing their dominance over the Irish Sea." To understand the significance of the Dubhgaill, one must explore their origins. Scholars such as David McRitchie, in his seminal work Ancient and Modern Britons, argue for an African presence in early Europe, stating, "There was a time when the natives of these islands were black." This aligns with the theories of Gerald Massey, who believed that many early European populations had African roots. In a book of the beginnings, Massey wrote, "Africa was the birthplace of humanity, and its spread to the north brought with it the arts, sciences, and leadership that would define civilizations. The term Dubhgaill further reinforces this connection. As Michael Conran notes, Dub means black, without any word of hair, underscoring that the description of the Dubhgaill referred to their complexion rather than their hair colour. This distinction is echoed in Gaelic records that describe these people as Black Lochliners, Black Scandinavians, Dubdanars, Black Danes, and Dubgenti, Black Gentiles. Such names reflect not only their origins, but their identity as rulers and warriors, whose African ancestry set them apart from other Scandinavian groups. Dieter Brasch, a historian specializing in African-European interactions, further elaborates on this dynamic. Brasch suggests that the Dubhgaill were not transient migrants, but integral to the political and military structures of medieval Scandinavia. The African influence on early Europe was profound and enduring, from architecture to governance, Brasch writes, pointing to archaeological evidence of African artifacts and cultural practices in Scandinavian sites. The rise of the Dubhgaill was not limited to Ireland. After consolidating power in Dublin, they expanded their reach to Scotland and Denmark. As noted in Studies in the Topography of Galloway, 1887, these people are remembered in Gaelic records as Black Lochliners, Black Scandinavians, and Dubgenti, Black foreigners or people. Their maritime dominance earned them the moniker Black Men Strong at Sea, a testament to their naval prowess and ability to control trade routes and coastal settlements. In AD 877, the Dubhgaill engaged in a fierce battle with the Fingal, seeking to consolidate their power in Ireland. The Annals of the Four Masters recount, ever since the Danes, or Dubhgaill, first came to Ireland, there had been a contest between them and the Norwegians, or Fingal, for superiority. While the Fingal won this particular battle, the Dubhgaill's legacy was far from diminished. They regrouped and set their sights on Denmark, where they established themselves as rulers and cultural influencers. The idea that the Dubhgaill once ruled Denmark might seem far-fetched to those steeped in traditional Viking narratives. Yet, the evidence is compelling. Linguistic and historical records consistently describe the Danes as Dubhgaill, emphasizing their darker complexion and African origins. This characterization is supported by Gaelic historians who distinguished between the Norwegians, described as Fionn Lochlineaich, White Scandinavians, and the Danes, known as Dub Lochlineaich, Black Scandinavians. The dominance of the Dubhgaill in Denmark is further reinforced by place names and folklore that bear traces of their African heritage. Gerald Massey observed, "The roots of many Scandinavian traditions trace back to Africa, where civilization itself was born." This connection challenges the notion that Vikings were exclusively pale-skinned seafarers, revealing a more diverse and complex history. The Dubhgaill's influence extended far beyond their military conquests. They left a genetic and cultural imprint on the regions they ruled, blending with local populations and introducing African traditions that would shape European history. Their story, however, has been systematically erased or downplayed, a fate shared by many African contributions to global history. The term Dubhgaill itself has been misinterpreted over time, with detractors arguing that it referred to dark hair rather than skin. Yet, as Michael Conran asserts, Dub means black, without any word of hair. The consistent use of this term in medieval records, coupled with descriptions of the Fingal as Gentiles of pure colour, leaves little doubt about the Dubhgaill's distinct racial identity. By reclaiming the story of the Dubhgaill, we not only honour their legacy, but also challenge the Eurocentric narratives that have dominated historical discourse. Scholars like Massey, McRitchie, and Brasch have laid the groundwork for a more inclusive understanding of history, one that recognises the contributions of African peoples to the development of European civilizations. The story of the Dubhgaill is not just a tale of conquest and dominance, it is a reminder of the interconnectedness of human history. The black strangers who ruled Denmark were more than invaders. They were pioneers, innovators, and leaders who bridged the gap between Africa and Europe. To ignore their story is to deny a vital piece of our shared heritage. As we continue to uncover the truths of the past, let us remember the words of Gerald Massey. History is not a thing of the past. It is with us always, shaping our understanding of who we are and where we come from. The Dubhgaill may have been erased from mainstream narratives, but their legacy endures, a testament to the enduring influence of Africa on the world. For those of African descent today, this ancient history is not just an academic curiosity, but a powerful reminder of Black strength, resilience, and global influence long before the colonial period. The Dubhgaill were not victims, but active contributors to the development of Northern Europe, and their story challenges stereotypes and empowers modern Africans, particularly youth, to reimagine their place in world history. By learning about the Dubhgaill, we reclaim a sense of identity and pride in our ancestral legacy. As we move forward, this history can serve as a source of strength, showing that Black people have always been central to shaping the world. Reclaiming this history isn't just about honouring the past, but about building a future based on the pride and resilience of those who came before us. The Dubhgaill remind us that the fight for recognition, equality, and justice has deep roots, and it is a fight that continues today. In ancient times, the term Ethiopian was used broadly to describe Africans, particularly those living south of Egypt. The ancient Greeks, notably Homer, Hesiod, and Herodotus, referred to these Africans as Blameless Ethiopians, a title that reflected the high regard in which they were held. This essay delves into the historical context behind this term and explores why Africans were called blameless by the ancient Greeks, Romans, and other early civilizations. One of the earliest references to Ethiopians in literature comes from Homer, who described them as a noble and divine people. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Ethiopians are depicted as a race beloved by the gods, with Homer famously stating that Zeus went yesterday to ocean to a feast with the blameless Ethiopians, and all the gods followed. There is no time to sit, to the streams of ocean, to the land of the Ethiopians, where they offer a hecatomb to the gods. I go once again, so as to receive my share of the feast. This portrayal of the Ethiopians as favoured by the gods underscores their elevated status in the ancient Greek imagination. Hesiod, another Greek poet, also contributed to this portrayal by recounting the Ethiopian king Memnon, a figure of immense reverence. In his epic poem, Theogony, Hesiod not only speaks of Memnon's divine lineage as the son of Eos, the goddess of dawn, but also highlights his role in shaping the ancient world, further linking Ethiopians with celestial and divine qualities. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, referred to Ethiopia as the farthest region of Africa, and described the Ethiopians as taller, handsomer, and longer lived than any other men. He also noted their lands as being rich in gold and ebony, emphasizing their wealth and physical beauty. These attributes, along with the moral integrity attributed to them, reinforced the idea of Ethiopians as exceptional people in both character and prosperity. The idea that Ethiopians, i.e. Africans, were deeply respected in the ancient world is further supported by the works of Pindar, a 5th century BC lyric poet. In his Olympian odes, Pindar celebrated Memnon's deeds and leadership, even associating him with the establishment of the city of Susa in Persia, modern-day Iran. This suggests that Ethiopians held significant influence beyond the African continent, further adding to their esteemed reputation. The notion that Ethiopians were revered extends to their role in shaping early civilizations, especially Egypt. Diodorus of Sicily, writing in the 1st century BC, asserted that Egypt was a colony of Ethiopians, led by Osiris, the Egyptian god of the afterlife. This claim suggests that the grandeur of ancient Egypt, long admired for its intellectual and architectural achievements, was rooted in Black Africa. Diodorus further noted that many of the customs, religious rites, and symbols used in Egyptian society originated from Ethiopian traditions. The connection between Ethiopia and Egypt implies that the profound influence Africa had on Mediterranean cultures, especially Greece and Rome, cannot be understated. By framing Ethiopia as the progenitor of Egyptian culture, Diodorus of Sicily elevates the contributions of Black Africans to the foundations of Western civilization. The term Ethiopian derived from the Greek word Ethiops, originally referred to the dark-skinned peoples of the African continent. According to the renowned historian Herodotus, often referred to as the father of history, the Greeks regarded the Ethiopians as a prominent people, distinct from the Egyptians. In Book 2 of the Histories, he states, "The Ethiopians are a great people, more just than any other." This phrase encapsulates the respect the ancient Greeks had for this group, illustrating that the term was not merely geographic, but also deeply cultural. Homer, writing in the 8th century BC, mentions the Ethiopians in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, highlighting their esteemed position among the gods. He writes, "The blameless Ethiopians, the most favoured by the gods, were the first to feast with them." This portrayal reflects the significance of the Ethiopians in Greek mythology, positioning them as paragons of virtue and moral rectitude. Moreover, the ancient Greeks associated the land of the Ethiopians with great beauty and prosperity. Hesiod, another foundational poet of Greek literature, described Memnon, the king of the Ethiopians, as a noble warrior whose home is blessed with abundance. Such references illuminate the perception that ancient Greeks held regarding the richness of Ethiopian culture and civilization, emphasizing their significance not only in Africa, but also in the broader Mediterranean narrative. Many ancient historians, including Herodotus and Diodorus, wrote extensively about the African presence in early European and Mediterranean history. Lucian of Samosata, a 2nd century AD Greek satirist, claimed that astrology, a key scientific discipline, was first introduced by Ethiopians and then passed down to the Egyptians. This statement emphasizes the role that Ethiopians played as intellectual pioneers in fields that would later influence Greek and Roman science and philosophy. Heliodorus, Greek writer and priest of Isis in the 3rd century AD, described the Ethiopians as models of wisdom and righteousness in his work, Aethiopica. His Ethiopian king was portrayed as a compassionate and merciful ruler who encouraged peace and refused to punish enemies with death. This consistent depiction of Ethiopians as moral exemplars aligns with the Greek notion of blamelessness. But why were Africans called blameless by the Greeks and Romans? The answer lies in the ethical virtues attributed to them. Diodorus of Sicily, for example, noted that the Ethiopians had never been conquered by external forces and maintained peace within their society for millennia, due to their just and pious nature. He remarked that the Ethiopians surpass all men in longevity, justice, and piety, highlighting their status as a morally superior people. Roman historian Claudius Aelianus, writing in the 3rd century AD, echoed similar sentiments, stating that the gods visited the Ethiopians frequently due to their righteousness, calling them the justest of men. The term blameless thus reflects a broader cultural perception of Africans as paragons of virtue, untouched by the corruption and conflict that plagued other societies. The cultural significance of the term blameless Ethiopians can be understood through various ancient writings that depict Africans as possessing moral superiority. According to Diodorus of Sicily, the Ethiopians are like the gods, They have never experienced invasion, living in peace with one another. This account indicates that the Africans were revered for their peaceful existence and ethical conduct, which the Greeks recognized as a model for society. This reverence is echoed in the writings of Lucian, who praised the thoughtfulness of Africans, suggesting that their wisdom contributed to the philosophical foundations of the ancient world. He noted, "The Africans are thoughtful, their wisdom profound, and their knowledge unparalleled." Such assertions reflect a consistent admiration for the intellect and character of the Blameless Ethiopians, emphasizing their role in shaping ethical and philosophical thought in the ancient Mediterranean. Furthermore, the Ethiopian influence extended to governance, with the idea that their systems of justice and law were foundational in the development of societal structures in the Mediterranean. Claudius Aelianus highlighted this by stating, "The Ethiopians do not need doors in their homes, as they are a people who do not steal." This portrayal reinforces the concept of the Blameless Ethiopians as a society that thrived on mutual respect and integrity. In addition to their moral superiority, Africans were also recognized for their contributions to intellectual and cultural advancements. As mentioned earlier, Lucian claimed that Ethiopians introduced astrology to the Egyptians, who then passed it on to the Greeks and Romans. This indicates that Black Africans were instrumental in the early development of science and cosmology, disciplines that would shape Western thought for centuries. Ethiopian architectural influence also extended into Egypt, whose temples and monuments inspired later Greek and Roman designs. Black Africans were depicted in art and sculpture across Mediterranean cultures, reflecting their revered status and substantial influence. German scholar Eugene George emphasized this point, stating that Ethiopians played a dominant role in Africa, Asia, and even Southern Europe for over 1,000 years. Their influence on trade, religion, and politics laid the foundation for many aspects of international commerce and governance that we recognize today. In 1825, Arnold Hermann Hörin, professor of history and politics in the University of Göttingen in Germany and an expert in the economic interpretation of history, published his great work, Eden Huber, where he concluded that it was among these ancient black people of Africa and Asia that international trade was first developed. He wrote that as a byproduct of these international contacts was an exchange of ideas and cultural practices that laid the foundations of the earlier civilizations of the ancient world. Hörin wrote, "From the remotest times to the present, the Ethiopians have been one of the most celebrated and yet the most mysterious of nations. In the earliest traditions of nearly all the civilized nations of antiquity, the name of this distant people is found. The annals of the Egyptian priests are full of them, and the nations of Inner Asia, under Euphrates and Tigris, have interwoven the fictions of the Ethiopians with their traditions of the wars and conquests of their heroes. And at a period equally remote, they glimmer in Greek mythology. When the Greeks scarcely knew Italy and Sicily by name, the Ethiopians were celebrated in the verses of their poets. And when the faint gleam of tradition and fable gives way to the clear light of history, the luster of the Ethiopians is not diminished. They still continue to be the objects of curiosity and admiration, and the pen of clear-sighted, cautious historians places them in the highest rank of knowledge and civilization. Stephanus of Byzantium, who is said to represent the opinions of the most ancient Greeks, wrote quite starkly that Ethiopia was the first established country on earth, and the Ethiopians were the first who introduced the worship of the gods and who established laws. The 19th century English historian Flora Shaw, who was incidentally the wife of the then British Governor-General of a colonised Nigeria, wrote that the fame of the ancient Ethiopians was widespread in ancient history. Herodotus described them as the most beautiful and long-lived of the human races. And before Herodotus, Homer, in even more flattering language, described them as the most just of men, the favourites of the gods. The annals of all the great early nations of Asia Minor are full of them. The Mosaic records allude to them frequently, but while they are described as the most powerful, the most just, and the most beautiful of the human race, they are constantly spoken of as black, and there seems to be no other conclusion to be drawn than, at that remote period of history, the leading race of the Western world was a black race. The legacy of the Blameless Ethiopians endures as a testament to Africa's central role in the development of human civilization. The term Ethiopians, of course, was not limited to one group, but encompassed all Africans south of Egypt, a recognition of their profound influence and standing in the ancient world. Ancient texts, from Homer to Herodotus, provide a glimpse into a time when Africans were seen as moral exemplars and key contributors to intellectual and cultural advancements. Diodorus and others confirm that Africa, far from being on the periphery of history, was at the very centre of it. The Blameless Ethiopians remind us of Africa's profound impact on shaping the ancient world and invite us to reconsider modern narratives that often marginalise Africa's contributions to global history. Through the accounts of ancient writers, we gain a deeper understanding of Africa's significance in the past and its enduring legacy in shaping our present. The legacy of the Ethiopians reaches beyond the pages of history. It speaks to our very soul, reminding us of the heights humanity can reach when guided by principles of fairness, wisdom, and devotion to the greater good. Their unblemished reputation serves as a model for us all, urging us to strive for a future that echoes the values of the Blameless Ethiopians. Thanks for watching this episode. Do remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and look out for the next one on Africa's great civilizations.